What's up, Mage Crew? I'm starting this podcast as I want to read some chilling stories, whether true or fictional, of hauntings, UFOs, and anything disturbing. We will be working on where you, the listener, can submit your stories and we can read them. We will also have guests on from the Spooky Fan panel from our movie nights every Saturday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on YouTube and Twitch, X, wherever we are located at, to read their own stories monthly as well. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the whispers of Landon Manor. The first snowfall of the year brought more than just a chill. It carried an eerie silence that settled over the town of Swindon like a shroud. I moved into the old Landon Manor on the outskirts, a place whispered about in hushed tones at the local pub. They said it was haunted, but for a writer like me, seeking solitude and inspiration, that was just another selling point. The house creaked like an old ship at sea, every board groaning under the weight of its own history. My first night, I woke to the sound of footsteps, not unusual in an old house, but these were deliberate, as if someone was patrolling the halls. I dismissed it as the wind, or perhaps my overactive imagination. Days passed, and strange occurrences became routine. Books rearranged themselves, the temperature dropped inexplicably in certain rooms, and then there were the whispers. Voices too faint to understand, yet clear enough to unsettle. I started writing, not about my usual fantasy worlds, but about a haunted manor, my own. One evening, while writing by the candlelight, the flame flickered wildly, casting shadows that danced like specters on the walls. I looked up to see an old woman in the doorway, her skin pale as moonlit snow. She didn't speak, just stared, her eyes hollow, before fading into the mist. I began researching Swindon's history. The manor was once a refuge for the condemned, a place where the soon-to-be executed spent their last nights. The ground beneath was rumored to be a mass grave. Each piece of information felt like another nail in my own coffin, but I couldn't stop digging. Sleep became an enemy. Every night I'd see her, the ghost, always at the edge of my vision, always watching. She started to appear in my reflections, her face overlapping mine, until it was hard to tell where she ended and I began. Then, the ghouls came. They didn't look like the dead I imagined. These were corporeal, crawling out from under the house, their bodies twisted, eyes clouded with death. They didn't attack, just watched, waiting perhaps for something or someone. The townsfolk started avoiding me. I was the man living with ghosts, they said. My solitude turned into isolation. I stopped going out, consumed by my story, by the house, by her. One moonless night, I found blood on my hands. Not mine, too cold. It was hers, the old woman's. I followed the trail to a room I hadn't entered before, filled with relics of the past, an altar, candles, and her standing before an open grave. She spoke for the first time, her voice a whisper that filled the room. "You must finish it," she said. "Complete your story, or join us." Her words were a command, a curse. I realized then, my story was her story, her unfinished business. Writing became a fever, the pages filled with blood, not ink. As I recounted the tales of the condemned, their pleas, their final moments, with each word, the house grew colder, the whispers louder. The ghouls grew restless, their presence more tangible. They began to move objects, scratch at the walls, their nails leaving marks like claw marks. I was no longer alone in my writing. They were a part of the narrative, actors in my macabre play. The old woman's presence became oppressive. Her face now a permanent fixture in every mirror, every window. She was waiting, her patience wearing thin. I felt her anger, her desperation, as if she was willing me to finish or fail. I couldn't leave, the doors wouldn't open, the windows wouldn't break. The manor had become my prison, or perhaps my purgatory. I wrote through the nights, my only company the dead, my only light the flickering candles. Then came the visions, not just of the old woman, but of those buried beneath. Their deaths, their despair, replayed before me. I saw executions, felt the noose tighten, the blade fall. Each death was a chapter, heavy with sorrow and blood. The final night, as I penned the last words, the ghouls gathered, not menacing but expectant. The old woman stood at the head of the spectral assembly. "It is done," I whispered, laying down my pen. The house shook, not from anger, but release. The spirits began to fade, their unfinished business concluded through my words. But the old woman remained, her eyes meeting mine, a sad smile touching her lips. "You've done well," she said, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "But remember, your story intertwines with ours now. You will never truly leave this place." With those words, she vanished, and the house fell silent. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, but a part of me knew I was forever changed. The manor was no longer just a house, it was part of my soul. I tried to leave, to return to normal life, but my stories now had a darkness, a reality that was too close for comfort. Each word I wrote felt like a step back into that haunted place. Years later, I returned to Swindon, drawn back like a moth to a flame. The manor stood, untouched by time. I felt her presence, not as a ghost, but as a guardian of my story, of my fate. I moved back in, not out of my choice, but out of necessity. The house needed its scribe, its chronicler. The whisper started again, not of horror, but of a shared history, a shared destiny. I write now, not for fame or fortune, but to keep the peace. Each story I pen keeps the spirits at bay, keeps them from rising again. My life, my words, are their purgatory. The townsfolk still whisper about the haunted manor, but now they whisper about its writer too. I am as much part of its lore as the old woman, as the ghouls, as the blood-soaked ground. Perhaps one day, someone will take my place, continue this cycle. Until then, I write, I live, I die a little with each story, bound to this place until my own story ends. As I close this chapter, I wonder if my last words will be of freedom or of acceptance. The house breathes around me, a living entity, and I, its heart, beating with the rhythm of the undead. The end is not near, but it is always there in the shadows of waiting.